No one person for me is ever going to be everything. And so that's really kind of when I came to the understanding that I was polyamorous. And you know, in some ways, this understanding has made things a lot easier for me. In other ways, it has made things a lot more harder and a lot more complicated. Hey guys, it's Kat and it's time for another episode of True Tea. I wanted to thank you guys so much for joining me for this video. I'm really sort of nervous about having this conversation. I'm gonna be sharing some stuff with you guys that might disappoint you, might inspire you, I don't quite know, but I'm excited that I've been able to have these conversations with you guys, and I just wanted to thank you guys for showing some support for this particular series. It really does mean a lot to me. I've been trying to be more real and true with my content, as I discussed in my last video, so thank you so much for your support. So we're gonna get into this video, but before we do, since this is gonna be a heavy, real video, I think we should all go to the kitchen and get ourselves some tea. Personally, I am a little sick, so this tea is particularly poignant today. I am drinking some lemon ginger tea by Bigelow. And whoever gave me the idea in the comment section, I asked you guys a couple weeks ago what you guys use to sweeten up your tea. Someone told me fruit juice, and I have been using apple juice for my tea, and it's just made it so delicious. Ooh, it is a little hot though. Gee, all right. Well, hopefully I'll be okay. I wanted to tell you guys before I jumped into this video that I'm going to be speaking today, I guess, at CSUN. I'm really excited to see all the students and meet all the students there and talk to you guys about living in my truth. If you guys are ever interested in bringing me to your college, I always have the email where you can contact me about, you know, getting me to come to your school. So yeah, check out the description box. Anyway, let's get right into this topic. Let me take another sip right before we start though, because this is gonna be heavy. So this video is a response to a request that I got to talk about polyamory. I've mentioned polyamory a couple different times on my channel because I am a polyamorous person, and some people really wanted to know how I came to that conclusion, what sort of journey that was, and it has been a journey. So I am kind of nervous to talk to you guys about this stuff because this is something that I figured out about myself relatively recently, and it's weird because, you know, I sort of felt for a really long time like I had done all of my, like, you know, journey into self-discovery sort of stuff, but really coming to recognize that I was polyamorous was a bit of a journey for me. So let us begin in the conversations. So I got into my last relationship a little bit out of college, as a lot of you guys know. When I was getting out of college, I was going through a lot of, I guess you could say, rebranding, so to speak. I talked to you guys in the video that I talked about, you know, my second experience with sexual violence, where I met this guy at, you know, well, the owner of this house who was throwing these parties, and those sort of parties were a part of my life for the next like 4 years. Through that time, I'd also done a very, very quick stint of like sex work, and I did not really want to, you know, at that point, like after I graduated college, I did not want to associate with any part of my life. I had a lot of incredibly sex negative ideas about how I should be. Being a trans person, you are sort of, especially when it comes to dating, you know, you're sort of given this dichotomy of like what sort of trans person is acceptable and what sort of trans person isn't. A lot of guys who date trans women are very, very tired of meeting a girl who turns out to be a sex worker. They want to meet a girl who is educated, has a lot of things going for her, has never done sex work a day of her life, and is just, you know, Miss Goody Two Shoes. And as I discussed in my last video, I've been really trying to be Miss Goody Two Shoes. So going into my single life, all I wanted, you know, was to meet a guy who would actually respect me. And part of that for me was really, again, trying to cultivate this goody two shoes image of this person who wasn't even into anything like that sort of stuff, you know? And so I met my ex, and by the time I met my ex, I'd gone through a lot of stuff with dating. I had become incredibly bitter when it came to dating. I've been so used to men wanting to just use me for sex, men who just wanted to sort of call me after midnight so they can get some head or something. Like, I've been so used to men using me. So in so many ways, I'd given up on the idea of ever finding any sort of like good, reliable relationship. I had like given up the idea that I would ever sort of get monogamy, to be honest. But if I was being honest, what I wanted at the time was monogamy. I wanted a guy who would love me, you know, would want me for only me, and wouldn't need a ton of other people. Do you know what I mean? Like I was so used to being the side chick. I was so used to being, you know, the girl who people would call, you know, when there were no other options, that I had sort of gotten to a point where I'd accepted that I was never going to be prioritized in anyone's life enough to be, you know, someone's main piece. You know, I was really used to being the secret of a married guy, or the secret of a guy with a girlfriend. That was just kind of what I was used to. So when I met my ex, it was interesting because I had at that point been so twisted up in that sort of perspective of I'm never gonna find anyone, that like I was going on dates, if I'm being honest with you guys, because I was low key sort of using guys. You know, I was 21 years old. I just wanted a guy to take me out, buy me nice things. And I thought, you know what, if I get that from it, then, you know, it is what it is. That was my mentality. So then I met this guy and he was totally a sweetheart. I thought he was the most attractive guy in the world. I still kind of do. And just like, he was so handsome and he was so willing to date me. And he was so willing to introduce me to his friends and his family and things like that. He was so willing to claim me that when I met him and I was offered the opportunity of monogamy, I jumped at it. We went on one date and we were boyfriend and girlfriend weeks after, you know. But, you know, actually, the truth is that, you know, after I went on that first date, I had gone on another date with a guy, right? And I remember at a certain point in our relationship, he had found out that after we went on our first date that I went on a date with another guy. I forget what movie. We just went to go see a movie. I forget what movie it was, but it was one of the better ones that came out. And he didn't like that. He didn't like that after our first date that I had made a decision to go on a date with another person, which is going to be relevant later. But yeah, so I had this monogamous relationship, and I had really been content in monogamy. You know, the funny thing about me understanding now that I'm polyamorous is that way back in the day, my ex and I, we actually sat down and made a video about polyamory. And one of the things that we had said was that it's a great idea for other people, but it's not for us, you know? And, you know, just to go back to like the introduction to me and even the concept of polyamory, you know, I've been so used to hearing polyamory in the context of, you know, some guy coming to his wife and saying, hey, I want to be able to see other people. And then she just sort of grins, you know, her teeth together and says, I guess I'm okay with that. And so then they go and they do their own thing. And then sometimes what ends up happening is she'll leave the person, she'll leave him because she doesn't want to take it anymore, or he'll find another girl and then they'll, you know, they end up going off and being with each other. So I was really used to hearing about polyamory that wasn't functional, about polyamory that was so based on one partner wanting to get something sexual or something else, and then that not really working out. You know, that was what I was familiar with when it came to polyamory. When I was in college, my sweet mate gave me a book. This book was called Ethical Slut. In fact, I have a newer version of it right here. I was raised incredibly Christian, and, you know, the reason why he gave me this book was because back in college, he had heard me, you know, talk about going on all these dates and things. And, you know, I was always getting ready for a date, going on a date, some sort of, you know, date here, date there. And he just kind of was like, hey, I think this would be a book that you would like to read. You know, I think this would be good for you. And he handed this to me and I was so offended that he handed me a book that said slut on it that I didn't even read it. I just kind of tossed it, you know? And I had that book for a really long time, but I never picked it up and never read it. Now, Ethical Slut, for those of you guys who don't know, is a book about polyamory. And I think he was trying to very politely sort of tell me, hey, you might be polyamorous, but I wasn't hearing it, you know? Because of how I was raised very conservatively. I really wanted monogamy. And I'd sort of looked at monogamy as this standard, amazing thing that is only offered in, you know, very rare circumstances that I should covet, that I should desire, that I should want, that I should need. And so I looked at polyamory as like a thing you did for fun before you became serious about someone. And monogamy was the expression of you being serious with someone, right? But like a lot of things, you don't know how you truly feel about that sort of thing until you're actually there. Now, I don't want to get too specific about all of the issues that I had with my ex, because in truth, a a lot of them are sort of touchy, and I don't think he's a bad person. You know, I don't think that any, you know, maybe he's not fond of me these days, but I don't think he's a terrible person, and I don't want to ever make it seem that way, right? One of the things that did sort of become sort of clear to me in our relationship was that, you know, as much as I had tried to deny, you know, my kinkiness and deny my sort of inclinations with sex, it was part of who I was, you know? And at the time I was with a partner who just wasn't on that page. And I guess there's really no way for me to like vaguely talk about this. And if you were like my old Patreon patrons from back in the day, you will remember when this happened. But I had this experience with him where, you know, he was a big video game player, you know, and I had no problems with him playing video games. I thought it was awesome. I thought it was cute, and he kind of got me a little bit more into games. But the way he would play games was so incredibly, like he would just come home, put his headphones on and like not talk to me, but then have these very engaging conversations with people on Discord. And mind you, and I talked about this in my last video, but I was incredibly isolated in my last relationship, not because of any sort of abuse or anything like that, but he had moved me to Orange County where I knew absolutely no one. And I was sort of sitting at home all day working on my YouTube stuff and, you know, of course, working on my children's illustration stuff and working on my stuff. But ultimately, he, you know, was the only person I was talking to. And so when he came home and he would just sort of zone out into his video game world, it frustrated me because I wanted to talk to him and had all this pent up energy, right? And not only that, but I was very used to him. So at 21 years old, at 22, at 23, I was very, 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 very used to getting what I wanted out of men. Let's just be very blunt. I was very, very used to just like batting my lashes and having a guy basically do what I want him to do. And not that I needed that from him, but let's put it this way. When it came to sex, we were on a very, 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 very different level. And it's not like it never happened. It's just that it didn't happen very frequently. And this will make you laugh if you've known me for a while, if you've watched me for a while. I had a moment where I devised this like amazing plan. I thought this was like the smartest, best plan ever. This was the time, if you guys will remember all these old videos, I got sent a corset from a company, right? Some of you guys will remember that video. I said to myself, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna get dressed up, super sexy. I'm gonna put this corset on, these thigh highs. I'm gonna put, you know, I'm just gonna get va-va-voom. And back then, y'all, I wasn't dressing like this, okay? This was back when I was wearing, you know, my little vintage clothes, you know? I was very modest. And so at the time for me, dressing up like that was kind of a big deal. It was kind of a big deal. And so I got all dressed up and I thought, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna walk over to him, I'm gonna traipse up to him while he's playing his video game, and he is not gonna be able to handle himself. And mind you, I think I was like 22 at the time. This is back in the time where I really didn't have to do much to get a guy to pay attention to me, you know, especially just from where I was back then in terms of my relationship with intimacy. I didn't have to do much. I was not used to, at least sexually, being rejected from men. And so I walk up to him, I've got my stuff on, my titties are on my, you know, up here. And he just looks over at me and just like acknowledges that I'm there and tells me to give him a minute, you know? Now, looking back at this, there's some ways in which I sort of understand that response. I mean, if you're in the middle of a game and someone walks up to you, like you can just pause the game. You can just, you know what I mean? Like you can just stop the game or something. But like, I could not understand why it was so hard for him to at least not see that like I was trying to get his attention, you know, in a way. Because I felt like if you know, of course, because in my mind, you walk up to a guy, you're wearing full lingerie and all that stuff, and you know, you got your titties on your chin. Oh, he's just not gonna be able to handle himself. He's gonna throw everything aside and just jump on you, right? Of course, that's what I would like to believe, right? But I would have appreciated, I would have accepted, like, oh, you look really nice, even if it was a thing he felt forced. I would have liked the acknowledgement of like, oh, you're putting an effort here. Oh, you're trying to get my attention. And I got nothing. And it really messed with me. And so I ended up going into the other room and I laid on my bed and the corset was so tight. Y'all, I passed out. The corset was so tight. I had never, now this corset does not even fit me anymore. It's way too big because I'm a lot smaller than I used to be. But I passed out. And so by the time he was ready to do anything, I was gone. And you know what? I didn't really understand it at the time, but that particular moment in my life really made me sort of see things differently in terms of how I felt about a lot of stuff. And so now this is when the shit starts getting a little bit unethical. And I'm gonna admit some shit in this video that is hard for me to admit. So, on the back of me, you know, walking up to this guy who I loved, which, side note, one of the reasons why this really hurt me was up to that point, I'd had a very odd relationship with sex. Sex was something that I, you know, for a really long time was using as a tool. And maybe I'll do a whole video describing this because sex has kind of meant very different things to me with time. Sexual violence, especially sexual violence in the context of a man financially supporting me, really twisted my vision of what was appropriate, right? And so a lot of my interactions with men when it came to sex were me either having sex for the approval of the group or me having sex because I wanted to get something from this person, right? And my ex was the first person who I had sex with, who I genuinely loved, who I genuinely was like, for me, sex with you is an expression of how much I care about you, right? And so to be rejected, it like really messed with me. It really messed with me because I had very earnestly came to him and expressed something to him. And it was not nearly as important as his video games. Now, mind you, my ex did not know all the stuff that I told you guys about my past. At this time, my ex had not known that I had been through several instances of sexual violence, that I had done sex work for a very short period of time. He didn't know any of this stuff about me. He had no clue, right? So I don't think he really had a concept of like how important that moment was. And so in many ways, I can't really hold that against him because he didn't really know all this stuff about me. And I was like really trying hard to make it so that he wouldn't. But at the same time, it still impacted me and I reacted accordingly. So I had all these photos of me in my corset. And I'd start to feel a little bit more sexy and things like that. So I started privately posting all that stuff on kink pages. And that's something that I look back at now and I see as inappropriate and wrong. Because I was posting on these little private kink pages trying to get some attention because I wasn't really feeling like I was getting any at home. And for a moment, it really sort of did make me feel a little bit better, right? But sort of being part of these websites kind of helped me think a lot about what turned me on. Because again, I had such a really odd relationship with sex. And so I never truly asked myself, like, what are my kinks and what turns me on and what gets me off? And so these websites sort of made it, I wouldn't say they forced you to, but they kind of really heavily encourage you to like write that stuff down. And so I started to sort of have this very safe, happy zone on the internet privately, where I was able to start to feel more in touch with my kink. Problem, of course, being I wasn't sharing any of this with my partner. I wasn't having conversations with him about any of this stuff, right? Which again, I look back at and I say that's unethical. It's not fair. It's not right, you know? But for at the time, in the moment that I was in, it made me feel really good to have that stuff up there, to be having those conversations. It made me feel a sense of understanding. I started to feel like I was slowly reclaiming my sexuality. And through those kind of conversations is when I was reintroduced to the subject, the concept of polyamory. Now, when I was first introduced to the concept of polyamory, reintroduced rather, the concept of polyamory, it was a little hard for me to swallow, because even though I was doing all of these clearly very dishonest things on the internet, I still very much wanted to be in a monogamous relationship. I'd said to myself, these are going to be things that I eventually introduce him to. These are things that I'm going to eventually discuss with him. And then, you know, eventually everything's going to work out. That's just the way that I thought about it, is that, you know, we're going to, at some point, eventually down the line, have this conversation, and it's going to be a good one. And we're going to figure all this stuff out. That's the way that I had been thinking about it, right? And so I kept all this stuff to myself. And I kept it to myself largely because I thought, well, he wouldn't be able to handle it. You know, he can't even handle me in a corset. How is he going to handle all this other kinky shit that I'm into? And I was so ashamed of it. Like, if I'm just being honest, I was so ashamed of it. I was so ashamed of feeling how I felt, and hiding it from my partner definitely made it a lot worse, right? You know, and it was something that I almost felt like I needed to figure out before I presented it to him, because I didn't want to come to him and say, hey, I want to be with other people, or maybe we should open up, and then have that be something that I didn't actually feel was okay, right? So this was a thing that I had, you know, privately for a really, really long time, and he knew nothing about it, which again was wrong. But we stayed together, and we kept going on with stuff. And as the time went on, my career started to change. I started to travel more. I started to have more of a social life because I was getting out. I was doing certain things. And when it comes to the social life thing, my ex was a fraternity. He was in a fraternity in college, right? And my ex, he had kind of done his like going out and partying thing. He had no real desire to get back into that. He had been there, done that. Now I was, you know, in my early 20s, you know, I was definitely not, I didn't get it out of my system yet. You know, we started dating when I was 21. I went to art school. I hadn't gone to bars. I had had those, you know, experiences that everyone has. You know, my ex was a little bit older than me. And so I felt like these were things I wanted to explore and experience, and I started to be able to do that when I went out. And that's when I started to go out to certain places, you know, because again, a lot of this stuff was all digital, it was all in my mind. Then when I would go at these bars, I would meet these people who I could feel this sense of like connection to, or at least interest on my end. But it all felt so incredibly inappropriate and wrong because I was in a relationship, you know? And so then I started to even question, how can I be in a relationship, which, you know, we've all been told if you are in if you're in a relationship and it's monogamous, you can't even think of other people. You can't even have feelings about other people, right? And so I really battle a lot with that. Like, how am I developing these feelings and you know, these emotions for certain people, you know, when they're not my partner? I should only be thinking about this way for my partner. Everything else is inappropriate and wrong. That's the way that I had been thinking a lot about it. And so that led me to even more questions. And so I, again, wanted to get this all figured out before I talked to him. And so this is when it even got even more inappropriate, right? So at a certain point, I started to go to what we in the community call munches, right? And these munches are not anything scary. It's mostly just people meeting at like a restaurant or a bar to sit and have conversations and to meet each other that are in the community, right? And so I started going to these specifically polyamory-based munches. And I started to talk to people about polyamory and sort of my feelings and sort of where I was. And, you know, initially I kind of came to a couple of different conclusions. You know, a lot of the people that I had met who were polyamorous or who had more than one partner, a lot of those people were married and very early into their exploration of polyamory. You know, I wanted to get the solid, you know, definition of like, hey, this is gonna work. This is gonna, you know, this is something that is functional. That's what I wanted to know. But honestly, a lot of people that I met were still figuring out their polyamory. A lot of those people were not super sure about whether or not polyamory was something that they were into. They were exploring that, they were figuring it out. And from what I could piece together, it's been a very bumpy road for quite a few of them. Of course, I would meet people who had very functioning polyamorous relationships, but most people didn't, you know, and that didn't make me feel like I was confident in my polyamory enough to come and bring it to my partner. I just didn't feel like it was something that I could do. I wasn't comfortable or confident in it enough. And so, you know, I sort of kept slowly going to these meetings, and I eventually met some more people, and they eventually made me feel a little bit more comfortable. But whether or not polyamory was feasible became less and less obvious to me, right? So to really sort of fast forward this story, my ex did eventually find several of the pages that I had where I was discussing all of this stuff, right? And you know, it's one thing to have this secret website that you're using to discuss your kinks, and then keeping that from your partner, and then knowing that your partner isn't going to participate in your kinks or your interests or whatever. And I want to clarify that I'm not saying that polyamory is a kink at all, but what I am saying is that for me, I recognize that my partner was not into something that I later kind of came to understand was a very important part of who I was, and that I loved him, you know, and how I felt in terms of kink stuff didn't change that at all. But this was sort of like a really important part to me as I was coming to understand, and it was something that he absolutely was not going to participate in, right? And so again, it's one thing to have that all be a sort of secret where you don't really know how he feels, or you at least accept that he isn't okay with it. It's a completely other thing to have him see it and then say hard no. And the conversation that we had after he found it, he was pissed, obviously, rightfully so, he was upset. And one of the things that he kind of said to me was, look, maybe there's some stuff on this list that I'm open to doing, but most of this stuff, it's not for me. Most of this stuff I want nothing to do with. And then we sort of launched into this conversation about how when you're in a relationship, you're supposed to make sacrifices. Okay, maybe you're interested in this, maybe you're interested in that, but you should be able to make sacrifices in order to be in a relationship. You know, and when we talk about relationships, we often talk about that. We talk about how if you want to actually be in a relationship, you've got to either decide that you're going to get what you like, or you're going to settle for something that you mostly like, right? And I don't know why, but I think in my mind, I've always sort of thought that that wasn't okay. You know, one of the things that I kind of recognized as I really meditated on my relationship was that I had expected my ex to be absolutely everything. You know, I mean, mind you, I didn't have a lot of friends back then, but I had this expectation for him to be the end all, be all of absolutely everything. I wanted him to be able to do all the things I like to do, to like all the things that I liked. And we've talked about this in my previous video, but one of the big issues that we had was that, you know, I converged a lot to his interests. He didn't converge at all to mine. You know, it took him so long to even watch a season of Cowboy Bebop. You know, like I watched 9 seasons of Supernatural, 9 seasons of Supernatural, but it took him 5 years of our relationship for him to watch 1 season of Cowboy Bebop. 1, you know? And it was just one of those things where like we were so, in the ways that we were right, we were really, really, really right, you know? In the ways that we were disconnected, we were really disconnected, you know? And for me, it kind of came down to, you know, I love him. This is an absolute. I want him to be part of my life forever. That's how I felt, right? I also have these other things that I'm interested in. And I'm not gonna get too into detail with this stuff because I don't want to put him on blast. That's not really what I'm here for. But even though we didn't talk about it, right? Even though we never really had a conversation about it, throughout our relationship, I had very deep suspicions that he was interested in some things kink-wise that I am just diametrically opposed to, like 100%. And I think I really started to think a little bit more about that when we were having the conversation about, you know, sacrifices in relationships, right? Like, I really felt like he had these interests And I knew I was never gonna be able to fulfill them. Like, it's a hard no for me. It's a hard, absolutely no for me. But I love him, you know? And as we were starting, so him finding this stuff was, at least for a moment, it was like an interesting, positive, negative sort of situation, because on one hand, we were finally having these open conversations, right? We're finally talking about it. It took him snooping through my shit to find it, but we're finally having these open conversations. On the other hand, you know, obviously this wasn't a thing that he was into. But it made me really think a lot about what we could do from here, you know, because even though we didn't talk about it, had a suspicion that he had a certain interest that I was not into. And so I really started to think about, like, so let's say he were to find someone who, you know, likes all the shitty television that he likes, and was into what he was into sexually, right? Would that be so bad? And as I like really thought about it, I thought, you know, it would be a hard pill for me to swallow, but we have the foundation of love. We have the foundation of, we're together, this is who we are, this is what it is. And I recognize that it wouldn't really bother me if he had someone else in his life that he was seeing. You know, because of course, often when I was thinking of polyamory, I was thinking about it in terms of me doing whatever I wanted to do, you know? But when I started thinking about my ex, like really think, because early in our relationship, I was all types of all over the place in terms of like suspecting that he was doing this and suspecting he was doing that, and he never was. My ex was a total sweetheart, and, you know, was never nearly as nefarious as I was. But he absolutely, you know, he absolutely was on his P's and Q's, but I wasn't thinking like he was. And so I used to get so like heartbroken and upset, and there'd be times where we'd be out and about, and I would be crying because I would think he was doing something. He wasn't doing anything. It was all in my head. I was just so jealous for no reason. He was totally a faithful, awesome guy, but I just, in my head, that wasn't what the case was, right? And I recognized that I had no longer been sort of restrained by that. I had no longer sort of been restrained by that degree of insecurity where I was like, oh my gosh, if he has anything with anyone else, that's a deep, deep betrayal of me. I recognized that no, it wouldn't be a deep betrayal. It would just be him doing what he's enjoying to do with another person, and that's okay. You know, I still love him. We are still a couple. This is, you know, if we had that understanding, whatever he did with anyone else would have been not a big deal. And unfortunately, this conversation we're having right now was not a conversation I was ever able to have with him. And I really, really, really wanted to, but without getting into too much detail, my ex had a lot of unresolved issues, and he put a lot of stock into our relationship, which I'm not saying he shouldn't have, but any bit of instability in our relationship resulted in him often reacting in very dramatic ways that made me feel very scared. And so it was one of those things where I wanted to talk to him about this stuff. I wanted to have a full conversation, but he wasn't stable enough for me to have it. And I felt that he deserved, I mean, I was doing a lot of stuff I shouldn't have been doing. I'm just gonna be super clear. I was doing a lot of shit I shouldn't have been doing. But every time I would feel like, okay, we're about to have the conversation, something would happen. Something would happen. And I would feel like this is the worst time to do it. This is the worst time to have the conversation because I don't want to hurt him. I don't want to ruin him, you know? And unfortunately, I know that if I really came to him and said, hey, look, I love you more than anything in this world. You're the most important person to me. I, however, feel like it might be good for us if we opened up or we were poly and things like that. I know that if I said that to him, it would ruin him. Like, absolutely ruin him. And so I never was able to have that conversation. And that, for me, is still to this day one of my biggest regrets because, of course, I was still figuring it out for myself, but at the same time, I think he deserved to know what was going on. I think he deserved to know how I felt. He deserved to have the answers. He deserved to have the truth. And I was so afraid of giving it to him because I was so afraid of losing him. And keep in mind, guys, I don't have a very close relationship with my family. At the time, I didn't really have any friends. He was literally the only person I had. He was literally all I had. If I lost him, I would have been out on my ass, you know, with no one supporting me. You know, when I mean support, I don't mean money, because especially at this point, it's another thing, I was paying all of our rent. While he was buying video games, vinyls, all this stuff, I was paying all of our rent. So it wasn't financial, so please don't get it messed up like that. But it's like, I loved him, you know, I still do love him, you know. He was and is one of the most important people to me ever, you know. And so my sort of feelings or interests in other people didn't change that. It didn't erase the love I had for him. It I think in many ways, like if we were able to stay together, if we had a really good, rough, hard conversation about polyamory, and I was seeing other people and he was seeing other people, I have no doubt in my mind that we probably would still be together today. Well, I have a little bit of doubt because again, there were a lot of other issues, but I think our relationship would have gotten a bit better because frankly, as amazing as he was, I think that the lack of space that we had a little bit made it really hard for both of us to breathe because of course I found out after our relationship that he very much was into all of those things that I had suspected he was into that I was not willing to give him, you know? And so it was kind of a very clear situation of both of us wanting something that the other person couldn't give. And I don't think that's inherently grounds for not having a relationship. I think that he could have found someone and I could have found someone and we could have, through that, been able to enjoy and appreciate each other even more because we had those things. We had those people in our lives that were making us happy in that way, you know? But that's not how the cookie crumbled. So ultimately, I got really tired of being dishonest. When we were getting, so like after he found that stuff, a lot of people would want to just break it off right there, and he would have had every right to. But he wasn't wanting to break it off, and I wasn't either. I didn't want to. I wanted it to work out, but I kind of came to the understanding and the realization that like, it's not fair for me to keep him in this relationship when I want something else and I'm not giving him what he wants. You know, it's not fair. You know, it's not fair for him to sit there and be miserable and, you know, I'm taking away some of his best years where he could find someone who wants to be monogamous with him, you know, because at that point in my life, I really started to recognize that I was not monogamous. And it was not monogamous. When I say I'm not monogamous, I don't mean like, oh, I just don't like the idea of a relationship right now, which is also sort of true for me in this current phase of life. But what I do mean is that I understood that I found the idea, the concept, the proposition of monogamy to be upsetting, inherently upsetting, something I did not want, something I do not want to associate with, something that does not make me feel better. It makes me feel so much worse. And I wanted to be able to be honest with my partners. That for me was the big thing because living for years being dishonest to him was not good. And as you guys know, I'm constantly the sort of person who is trying to live in my truth, who is trying to be as honest as possible with myself and those around me. And being in a relationship where I could not express myself, and I could not say, this is how I felt, this is what my interests were, it doesn't work for me. It does not work for me. And so I had to make the decision that we were not going to be together and that was the best for us. 1 second, need tea. And that was an incredibly hard decision for me to make, but it was one that I felt needed to be made because I wasn't happy, he wasn't happy. I really do wish things were different because that man is still so important to me. He really is. And even though we're at different points in our lives, that man is so incredibly important to me. And I hate the fact that we were together for so long and it took me this long to figure this out about myself. Because had I known that early on, had I accepted that about myself, if I was being honest with myself, I would not have wasted all that time with him. And I don't think it was wasted time. I don't think it was wasted time. I think we still had a lot of really amazing, great, awesome moments, but you know, at the end of the day, I came to this conclusion, and he, at least from what I know, is still in monogamy land. And if I understood that I was polyamorous early on, I could have given him the option of an out. So nowadays, when I go on dates, when I meet people, I'm very, very honest about where I am, how I feel, what my perspective is, and what my polyamory is. So currently, I have 2 partners. Both of them are pansexual. They both know about each other, and I know all about their partners. Unfortunately, with both of my partners, they both tend to tell me everything, which I'm not against, but sometimes I don't want to hear everything. And so we all communicate with each other, and it's great. It's great. It's awesome knowing that people that I am, you know, really connected to also have other people that also make them happy. That's something that I kind of came to understand, made me feel very good, you know, because if my ex, for example, had someone who was, you know, doing all the stuff that he needed to do, and he was able to come to me and tell me, hey, I had this amazing experience, I would be happy for him because I love him, because I care about him, because I want him to have happy, positive, awesome experiences. You know, I might not be able to do all of that for you, but you can do that with other people, and I think that's great. You know, like right now, I have these 2 partners who I'm dating, and then I've got all these other people that I'm sort of seeing along with them. And they're all vastly different. And to expect any of those people to be everything for me is just so unrealistic. And that's kind of what I came to understand, is that no one person is going to be everything to me. And I don't mean I just need so much, but like the pressure to make a person, I want to be able to appreciate someone for who they are. And what I recognized in my last relationship is that I had spent a long time, a really, 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 really long time resenting him for who he wasn't. And that wasn't fair. Who he was still someone who made me incredibly happy, who made me feel incredibly loved, right? I should have accepted that was him, that he was vanilla, and that's who mostly, that's who he is, you know? And that's okay, and that's part of him, and that part of him is not divorced from the part of him that I still love and appreciate and enjoy. You know, it's all one person, and I should accept him for that one person, but no one person for me is ever going to be everything. And so that's really kind of when I came to the understanding that I was polyamorous. And you know, in some ways, this understanding has made things a lot easier for me. In other ways, it has made things a lot more harder and a lot more complicated. And maybe in some future videos, we'll talk about that. But anyway, that is how I came to my polyamory. If you guys would like for me to talk about any specific polyamory topics, we can have them. I definitely want to make a video about how polyamory is definitely, while it's made some things better, it has made a lot of things worse. Polyamory has also really, really reinvigorated my insecurities in a way that is just so intense, so intense. So I want to be able to talk to you guys about that at some point. Anyway, I should go. I got to get the hell out of here. I will talk to you guys next week. If you guys are not already subscribed to this channel, I think you should. We upload videos here every Wednesday at noon Pacific Standard Time. So yeah, support me and follow me and do all what you need to do. And if you're going to be at CSUN, if you're in the area today and you're seeing this super early, hopefully I'll see you guys soon. All right, I will talk to you guys later. Bye.